Hi, good day. In this video, I'll show you how to mud shower walls. However, I'll only be going over the main points of the whole process. So if you want some more in-depth training on all the nitty-gritty details, please check out nordicstone.co/courses. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. When you're working on a finished surface like this, it's crucial that you cover the area. A tarp or a ram board is a good choice, but in my case, I'm using plastic because that's all I had, and I was working on top of porcelain tile, which is really hard to damage, even if the plastic rips and the tile underneath gets dirty. Now, for delicate surfaces like hardwood floors or carpet, don't use plastic because it easily tears. Instead, use something like ram board with taped joints so no mud or water can get through it. But since I was working on this porcelain tile, I wasn't too worried because the plastic was really there to make cleanup easier. Now, the best choice for you might be to mix outside. However, I was just working far away from outdoors, and it was easier for me to mix right next to the shower. Now, the mud that I'm using is called a fat mud or wall mud, depending on where you buy it from. You can get it at your local tile supply store like Floor & Decor. I've never seen it at Home Depot or Lowe's. However, you might be able to buy it if you search for it and order it online. Sometimes you can get specialty stuff if you order online from Home Depot. However, what I do know that you can get in the store at Home Depot is all the tools for mixing your mud. The mixing tub that I'm using here can hold 2 bags at a time, and that's great for when you're just working alone. And the hoe I'm using is a regular garden hoe. Now here, I'm checking to see how plumb the wall I'm working with is, to see how much mud I have to put on it. And this wall leans back a bit, so I have to put more mud at the top. And I'm also checking to see how flat it is, see if there's any bows in the wall. Now, the bottom is a little different. It's because this is a curbless shower, and I used Schluter Curdy to waterproof the shower pan, and I ran the Curdy up along the bench shield. Now, before adding mud on top of this Curdy, I'm applying a thin layer of thinset so that the mud has something to stick to. Now, it's important that you pick up the mud that spills, because if you don't, it dries off pretty quickly. Now, what is important is that you measure out the right amount of water that you use for mixing your mud. That's why I'm using a small 5-quart bucket, because each of the bags that I'm working with needs about a gallon and a pint of water. And that might vary based on the bags that you buy, so make sure to read the instructions before you start mixing, because if you add too little or too much water, it makes a huge difference in the consistency of the mud, and it can make it harder to work with either way. And also, please make sure that you wear a mask while you're mixing, because you don't want to inhale any of the silica dust. Now here I'm checking to see how much more mud I need to add to the top and bottom. That is because I want to have a base that's as close to plumb as possible for my float strips to sit on. Now I'm marking where to place my float strips. And these strips are made out of redwood. They are 1/4 inch thick by 1.5 inches wide and 8 feet long. You can also buy these at your local tile supply store, or you can make your own by ripping some redwood on a table saw. Now make sure that the flow strips that you do end up using are nice and straight and they don't have any twists or bowing to them. Now, it's important that you wet them down first. This stops them from soaking up too much moisture when they sit on the mud. If you don't, they can dry out the mud around them too quickly, and that can make them hard to set. And setting them is probably the most crucial step in this whole process. So make sure to take some extra time to make sure that they're perfectly plumb and flat. And that makes everything easier for yourself later down the line. Now you start screeding or leveling off the excess mud, and then we fill in the low spots and screed again. Now, to ensure that my walls were square, I held my screed up against the finished wall with the float strips still on them, and then I held a framing square on top of that screed to see how much more mud I needed to add to the return walls to make them square. Now here I'm removing the float strips from the main wall I floated earlier. To do this, you lightly score with a trowel on either side, and then you take your trowel and sneak it in behind the flow strip to gently pull it off. It's important to not do this while your mud is too wet, otherwise you might pull off the mud behind it and to the sides. And you also don't want to score too deep, just score shallow, because if you damage the mud, we'll have to repair it. Now, if you do damage the mud, it's not the worst thing in the world. Just add some more mud to the wall, level it off as best as you can, make sure that your repair is lower or shallower than the finished surface. This way you can fill it with thinset after the wall dries completely.
This workout was intense, and I could definitely feel it a couple of days afterwards, mudding this entire shower by myself. So if you are all alone, have you never done this before, maybe aim to just do one wall per day. That will help you to avoid fatigue and to keep the quality of your work up. Now, it doesn't hurt to have a helper. If you want to knock it all out in one day, just make sure that you have all the prep work done beforehand to save yourself some time and not to stress out on getting it all done in one day. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it helpful. Now, if you want a complete list of tools that I used for this project, please check out nordicstone.co, and there you can find the toolbox page with a list of all the tools that I used. And you can also go to the course page to get more information about how to set tile and all the prep work needed for that. Now, I hope your project turns out great. Farvel, vi ses.